Hello, everyone, and welcome to Knittin' and Politickin', a weekly series of conversations on issues we face today. Tonight, I am really grateful to have Justin Davis and Jane George. Both are Democratic nominees for the Tennessee State House of Representatives and Tennessee Senate, respectively. They are on tonight to talk about their campaigns. My name is Renee Hoyos, and I'm running for Congress in Tennessee's 2nd Congressional District. I'm happy to have candidates on this show. I always am. Because of COVID-19, we have few opportunities really to talk to folks in person, and Zoom will have to do for now. Who knew a year ago when we were all contemplating running that we would be doing something like Zooming? So please feel free, you in the listening audience, to gather up your questions and put them in the chat, and I'll go ahead and put them to the candidates. But first, what am I working on this week? Well, I'm still working on that surprise birthday gift for a friend of mine, so I'm not showing it because she watches the show and I don't want to give it away. But please don't forget to post a photo of what you're working on in the Facebook comments so we can ooh and ah. And now we can get right down to it. I'd like to introduce Justin Davis and Jane George. They are our Democratic nominees for Tennessee House and Senate. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, we have been so lucky to have a lot of Democrats up and down the ballot to vote for in 2018 and again in 2020. When I first started voting in Tennessee, I was amazed at how little opportunity Democrats had for so many years. And I'd say within the past 5 or 10 years, we've seen a real increase in Democratic candidates running for office. And I have to say, in the class of 2020, there were great candidates running. The Democrats were offering just some really outstanding Democrats, and some of them have stayed on to run again in 2020, which I think is great. Now, Justin Davis, who is running for State House, and Justin, you can tell us about your campaign, but Justin was in the class of 2018, and we ran together back then, and I was so grateful that you decided to run again. Tell us about your campaign. What made you jump back into the ring and try again?
Well, part of it was exactly what you just said. I mean, having lived here my whole life, we didn't have a lot of options. I mean, sometimes there was that one name on the ballot. And so it's important for Democrats to have someone to go to the polls and, be excited to vote for. So many times in 18, knocking those doors, you'd have someone answer and they'd say, well, I'm going to tell you I'm the only Democrat on this street. And like, actually, you're wrong. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of us out there. But, in 18, I ran because I was irritated at first with school shootings. We just witnessed Parkland. I was frustrated. And not only that, but our public education here is suffering, our healthcare here is suffering in East Tennessee. We're facing so many issues. And, in 2020, it's the same issues. We're still facing those. And in a lot of cases, things have just gotten worse. The House-led GOP is doing nothing to help fellow Tennesseans. And so, I was kind of pushed a little bit to run. You go to events and talk to, district leaders and former volunteers, and they would kind of, nudge you in that direction. And I thought, we've got to keep up that fight. We've got to get, boost our public education, expand Medicaid. So, I figured I would take up that fight again and be sure that we had a choice come November on the ballot.
Yeah. Do you think has your platform changed much in this, in this new time, the second time around?
Not a lot, but there was something in 18 that I kept discussing, and I kept telling voters that, if we elect, the GOP back to the House, the majority, they're going to try and, pass the voucher system here in Tennessee. And sure enough, they did. And so we've really been hitting them on that, in my district, and, our incumbent here in District 14, he was the deciding vote. He was the one that cut that backroom deal and flipped his vote in support of vouchers. And fortunately, the courts have given us some big wins there, but, we can rest assured they're going to keep pushing vouchers until they get everything passed and the whole state's on a voucher system, or we can elect some, good Democrats that are going to go out there and support public education.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, public education is real important, and that really loomed large in the campaign last year and this year. I'd like to bring Jane back on. Jane, tell us, so you're a relative newcomer to politics, and I'd like you to share with folks what made you decide to run, because it's a much different issue when you're doing it the first time.
Absolutely. Well, the reality is that Tennessee is in a state of crisis in a lot of ways. I mean, we've got a crisis in healthcare, we've got a crisis in education, we've got a crisis in our economy, and we certainly have a crisis in our representation. So we are finding, and this seemed evident to me as a small business owner, that there were a few people that were kind of running the show. As I learned in opening a business here in Knoxville, and the more I learned, the more I found that this was not the way that government is supposed to work. And so becoming a part of the solution is the main reason that I ran. And that means that through my experiences just as a private citizen and dealing and navigating the healthcare system, and then as a business owner, these were two ways that these showed up. And I certainly have experience as a mom and have had kids who have gone through public schools, and so have the ability to watch my friends and my friends' children's children, some of them, navigating the school system here. So the reality is that there are a lot of issues that are that stem from inadequate legislation at the state level across the General Assembly. So both in accountability to our governor in the House of Representatives, although they're moving some wonderful issues forward. The Democrats are out there really representing the people. I had an opportunity to meet with Jeff Yarbrough in Nashville, the minority leader of the Senate, a week and a half ago in Nashville, and that gave me a lot of clarity in terms of what they are doing. The Democrats are definitely fighting for the people. So I'm actually very proud to be a Democrat right now.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, this is great. If anybody who's listening has questions, put them in the comment section and we will get to them. But yeah, let's spend a minute talking about education, all three of us together. I'm a product of public education. I went through the public school system from kindergarten all the way through college, through university, and I got a great education. But it's really troubling for me to see what education has become in this country, that it's so wildly unaffordable that what do you both think about the state of education in Tennessee, and what are the things that you would like to do to make it better? Jane.
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay.
I mean, I love the fact that in the state of Tennessee, you can get a 2-year degree without having to take out a student loan. And that's pretty remarkable because that's not true across the nation. So that's something that we in Tennessee can be really proud of. We do have some real economic disparities in the quality of our public education. And that is absolutely reflected when we look into our rural communities, our communities that are predominantly people of color, and we start to see that disparities in the quality of the education. Now, that's not to say that some of our schools are not great schools. Austin East has some amazing kids coming out of there. They're doing great things. So I don't want to say that there aren't things that are not, there are things that are working in all of our schools. But we unfortunately depend on, in terms of funding, we depend on an algorithm that was established back in the 90s, in 1998, I believe. And that algorithm was created in terms of creating a state budget before we even knew what a Chromebook was. I mean, it had not been birthed into existence. So we didn't have any kind of technology issues in terms of figuring out how much money we needed to make available to our students and to our teachers and to our staff and administrators. Things have really changed with online school there, and they're incredibly dependent now on technology. So these are not things that are even built into our budget algorithms. This is ridiculous that it's so antiquated. When they say, when Becky Duncan Massey says, well, our schools are fully funded, she's accurate in saying that they've met the needs that are determined by that algorithm. She's grossly inaccurate when she's talking about the needs that are met, the demands that we have now in our schools. So that's a really big deal, is how we're funding them. And that's something at the state level that I can do something about.
Yeah, that's so interesting that things haven't changed since the 90s. So we're fully funding a 1990s education.
That's correct. Like I
Okay,
said,
in 2020.
before a MacBook was ever pushed out from Steve Jobs' womb, they didn't exist in our schools. Yeah.
Yeah. Justin, I know that your big issue is the voucher program and potentially charter schools. Can you speak to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially the voucher system is pulling money out of our public education system and investing that in private schools. And, I don't have an issue with private schools. If, parents want to send their kids there, that's great. But we're already underfunding our public schools. So we really can't afford to pull money out of that. We rank in I think, 45th in what we invest per student nationally. We're spending about $1 billion less than other states here in the Southeast. So, we've got, what is it, $6 billion in a rainy day fund. So I think that we could take some of that funding and invest in our students, in our teachers. I always say that when you've got a well-educated workforce, that means there's more jobs, there's more opportunities. So I feel like education is the key for our state to get us on track and get our economy rolling. So, Governor Lee several months ago said he was going to invest, I think it was a few million, maybe 600 million in public education. And of course, they've started rolling that back. The wage increase for all of our public ed teachers, they pulled that back, but he got his wage increase this year. So, we really need to start holding them accountable for their actions. But we need some leaders who will go in there, understand how important public education is, and start making that investment. I would like to see us increase our spending by at least $2.5 billion over the next few years. Get our teachers those pay raises that we've been promising, and invest in vocational training, not just in our high schools, but also, our colleges. We need to start retraining our workforce for new jobs. And especially as, this pandemic has taken a toll on the economy, that's going to be really important as people start shifting into new jobs. So I think that we're going to have to really look at increasing what we're spending and where we're spending it. And the voucher system is not the way to go. I mean, we've seen it's failed everywhere it's been implemented. The students don't do any better than public education students. So, we were really on the wrong track. Like I said, luckily the courts have kind of straightened that out, but they will keep attacking public education.
Yeah, so we've funded it to 1990, right? And then we have a voucher program that takes away money. So what do we think in 1980?
Yeah, we just keep
1975? Is that how we're
rolling
funding?
it back, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's terrible because our children are our future. And if we don't have them educated and ready for the jobs of the 21st century, it's only to our detriment and the country's detriment. So I applaud both of you for supporting public education, because that's what Democrats do. They think about things that they invest in the community, not in the individual. And I think it's important to always remember that. I've got a question here. Jaden asked, what's your reaction to the recent bill that Governor Lee signed that restricted the rights of peaceful protesters at the Capitol building? Is there any way to reverse it? And is there any way to reverse it? What do y'all think?
I found that. Go ahead, Jay. I'm sorry.
No, you go.
I mean, I personally found it appalling. I mean, we are living in some really strange times. Some of this seems very Orwellian. So I was kind of shocked, but also not. I mean, I think that we can continue to expect bills like this from our legislature. They're really troubled by what they're seeing because they're seeing opposition to their beliefs. And I encourage people to keep protesting, keep making your voices heard. I feel like this is unconstitutional, and to try and suspend voting rights for protesters, I mean, that's ridiculous. So I don't think that this is actually going to stand. we've seen a lot of what Governor Lee has tried to push forward rolled back by the courts, and I think this will be another instance of that.
Yeah, Jane.
Yeah, I agree with you, Justin. I mean, I think it's absolutely a violation of your First Amendment rights. I mean, your First Amendment rights don't end at 10 o'clock. So these people are saying that they're constitutionalists, and then when they find it convenient, just like with women's rights protected by the Constitution, when they find it convenient to work for them, then they determine that they can violate whatever laws they want with the Constitution. They can just go out there and arbitrarily set a time of day and say people can't be out after this time. Now, the reality is when they created this, we already had laws in place that took care of things like vandalism. We already had laws in place that took care of problems with people breaking the law. If they were, doing anything that anybody would do that would be breaking the law. It's not dependent on whether it happens before 10 o'clock or after 10 o'clock in the evening. And the constitutional issue is a big one for me, because one of the realities is they continue to try to advocate for people. For example, we're talking about more on a national level, but people are advocating for these vigilantes to come out and create these, pop-up militias, really. Well, let's look at that, because how can then you say that's more justified than if you have a Black community who's making a pop-up militia and saying, you're taking away our rights. We're Americans, we have constitutionally protected rights. How come you get to take them away? So this works for everybody. So if we want to protect things across the board in an equal way, then that means everyone can equally participate at those levels. And that's where you get into a slippery slope. When you start to be someone who is on one particular side that has a very strong political leaning, perhaps an extremist perspective, you are also giving license to the extremists on the other side. And it's important for those people to keep that in mind, because as they start to violate and disrupt what literally are constitutional protections, they're doing it for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right there. I think they're taking for granted that this has been a red state for several years, and they're forgetting it used to be a blue state. And so at some point it's going to shift. And, what are they going to do when it's Democrats passing, taking advantage of these laws that they've passed? They're going to be furious.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really great point that you're making. They're, it's seem out of control with what they're doing right now.
Yeah, it's as if they're only, to use a Buddhist term, living in the moment, where they're in control and they're not looking at the future where, they may not be in control, because, it's a pendulum swing. It goes back and forth, and it's going to swing back, I hope. And, when that happens, they've got all these laws on the books that they're going to be very sorry that they've got on there. Although I'm hoping that as Democrats, we're going to take those laws, we're going to get rid of them and insert fairness back into the state, into our state laws. And I'm counting on you guys to get that done. Here's an interesting question from someone asked about, local legislators aren't listening to constituents. And I've talked to a lot of people that feel that way. And perhaps I am in a bubble, but I do hear that people are talking about, I call my legislator and I get blown off by staff, or I get put on hold, or I get told something only to find out it's not true. Constituent services is really important as a legislator. And I think what we have found here in this district is that people rely on constituent services almost more than policymaking. So, if somebody comes to you guys and they have, how are you planning on servicing your constituents when you're elected? Jane, how about you go first?
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, to me, it's one of the exciting parts of the job. You get to really meet with and interact with your constituents. They're contacting you. They're coming in and sitting down and talking to you. Look, our government was founded by people who understood that we had this polarity built into the system, right? I mean, our founding fathers had two parties, and they set it up so that there was a space in the middle that we would come to compromise. And they believed that that was the place where we were going to serve the most common needs of the most common people, using the most common goals, really, to serve the majority. And so I really come from that background. My parents, grandparents who were on different sides of the fence politically, but it's the same fence. And I want to remind everybody of that. We might have different playbooks, but we're on the same team in the same game. And we need to start looking at each other's playbooks and talking about those things. When it comes to constituents, we also need to understand that we're going to have to listen to people that we may not personally agree with, but we want to have space. They might have some good ideas, right? So we need to be available to hear what they have to say. It's really important to me. I want to sit down. I had a great interview with a libertarian guy the other day, and he sent me a note. He was like, that was my favorite interview. And it was because I said, well, tell me how you would solve this problem. Well, that's kind of a good idea. You know, I think people want to be heard. And I think it's important that we really do listen, even if they're not people in agreement with us. I will tell you that Becky Massey had a group that had an appointment to meet with her from Planned Parenthood in Knoxville, and she walked away from them. She would not even speak with them. And when people want to talk about her great kindness to the community, I'm not sure that they realize that she's not that way with everybody. I'm going to tell you right now, I want to be that way with everybody. I want to be present for whomever wants to talk to me. I want my time to be available. I've got a phone number that I put out there. People can call me now, and I'm going to keep that phone number if I get the job so that people can call me then. I will keep business hours here when I'm in and we're out of session, because I want to make sure that people are getting their needs met. When I went to the Women's March, I'll tell you this very quickly. I had a big, huge banner made, a 12-foot banner, and the banner said, do your job, vote for the voice of your constituents. And that was very important to me back then. And it's still one of my driving forces.
Great, excellent. Yeah, Justin, constituent services.
Yeah, and I mean, like Jane, I hear the stories of the current office holder blowing off meetings. He avoided Moms Demand Action recently. So it's important. And as Jane said, we need to be listening to all sides. And that's something that I've done. I'll go up and knock on a Republican's door just as quickly as I will a Democrat. And I'm too have come from a conservative family. So I kind of understand, not all Republicans are evil. We've got to learn to work together. And that's what this country is missing. Years ago, that's what would happen. Democrats and Republicans would sit down and they would meet in the middle and they would pass legislation that would be beneficial to Americans. And we're just not seeing that anymore because you've got extremists on both sides. And it's now a sin to reach across the aisle and get something done. And I think that we need to change that. That's really important. There's that old saying that you got the left wing and the right wing, but they're part of the same bird.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's time for us to come together to reach across the aisle. And that's what I do when I'm out campaigning. I ask, what can we do for you? What can we do to make the state better? I can come up here and tell you everything I believe in, but my job is to represent you. So I need to know what you think is best. And that's the approach I've always had. And, once elected, my door will be open.
Yeah, I think in these districts, we're running in districts that are, purple leaning red. And I think it is important that we have this ethic that we will listen to everyone, because for so long it's just been about listening to one particular voice. And I have to say, I had my issues with Jimmy Duncan, but whenever I asked for something from him, I'd have to wait 6 weeks, but I would get like a 2-page letter. Did you ever get these from him, Justin? If you asked him a question, be 2 pages, single spaced. And it was just this chunky letter, and you'd go through it and you didn't agree with a lot of it, but I'll tell you, I felt heard. He answered my question. I didn't like the answers, but I felt like he heard me. And, I think it's important that we continue to do that, because we live in a district where we can't just, lean one direction. We've got to kind of straddle the middle, and it's difficult, and it makes, people unhappy on both sides. But I think it's important that as candidates running in these multicolored districts, these red and blue places, that we continue to do that. So let's talk about what campaigning has been like during the time of COVID. And Justin, I'm actually going to start with you, because we campaigned before virus. And I don't know about you, but I had the time of my life campaigning. I had so much fun. But what's it been like for you since COVID started?
Yeah, like you, it was just so much fun. Meeting so many new people, so many fantastic people, and it felt like we were always on the go. You and I were always in the same places, it seemed like, and I miss it. Definitely had a different game plan coming into this. And then, as I was telling you earlier before we got on here, it was like the brakes hit and we came to a screeching halt. So, we all have to kind of find new ways to get our messages out there and be a little innovative in how we do things. But I've hated it because I enjoy knocking on those doors, even when it's 95 degrees outside. I miss those events and seeing, all those smiling faces and having those important conversations with voters. So I was hopeful that we would get through this a little quicker. I don't think that we're going to. So, we just got to kind of do what we can and make do with what we've got. But for all those people out there listening, I do miss you, and please reach out because I miss those conversations. And, you'll be hearing from us on the phone or with lit drops, but this is a crazy time. And I know it's been tough on all the campaigns and not nearly as fun as it was in 18.
Yeah, and Jane, I know you're a doctor, and this is your first campaign, so poor thing. You're doing virtual campaigning, but I'm interested to hear how it's been for you, and especially, being a doctor, how you're seeing the way the virus is playing out and the solutions or the lack of solutions.
Yeah. Well, I don't have anything to compare it to in terms of the campaign. So we're just being really creative, and I'm having fun figuring out, it's like a puzzle, figuring out how to reach people. And we're doing a lot of fun, exciting things to try to reach people through social media, but it is not the same as meeting people. And I'm a people person. I love people. So I love conversation. And so I hear about these stories you guys have, and I long for those days. But who knows what it's going to look like between now and November. But I don't think we're going to get too much of a shift of that. I think we might be doing some outdoor things that are where we have an opportunity, where we have a microphone and we invite 30 people to be in a huge park, where people can be there to ask questions and participate. I think that is a good possibility, but it's still not the same as gatherings and meeting a lot of people at once. In terms of what I've seen, and this is kind of a little shift away from campaigning, but what I've seen as a physician being here in Tennessee, or in my particular district, is I had a patient who is a young girl. She's just turned 15. And her mother, of course, comes in with her, and we're talking about how she's doing to keep her immune system up, and is she staying hydrated, and how is she eating? Is she getting her exercise and her fresh air? And what is she doing? And the mother turned to me and said, well, I think we just need to get all the kids together, and they can all catch COVID, and then this will all be over. And I turned to the mother and I said, I want you, through a mask, of course, we're all wearing masks, gloves. This isn't, we don't think this is chickenpox.
Right.
And we don't know yet, but we don't think it's chickenpox, and we don't think you should be having COVID parties. So I want to discourage you from that train of thought in talking to other parents and even in talking to your child. And that was a patient that I saw 2 times a week, and she decided not to bring her child back to see me again. So, and they are very much incredibly wealthy family, and very, very much a red Republican household. So what I'm seeing is how partisan allegiance lines up with care, and how smart people are about how they're approaching things. I just saw a great study that was done today, or was released today, that showed that Republican families were quite significantly more likely to be in favor of reopening schools than Democratic families. They also showed that in online participation, Democratic families were more likely to choose to stay home and protect their children. And also, the most interesting statistic of this entire study was showing Black families and Black parents overwhelmingly would keep their children at home, even though the burden of having children at home might be much greater for some of those people. So it's absolutely impacting not just people in disparity in terms of deaths. We know that COVID-19 is having a much harder hit on people of low income. We know it's having a much harder hit on people who are living at or below the level of poverty. We know that we have communities here in Knoxville where a large percentage of people are living under the level of poverty. And so consequently, they're going to be much greater at risk. So there are politics involved in people, how they care, not just for themselves, but others. And that leads to the mask issue. So because we've had really failed leadership, it did not have to look like this. And the reality is that we've had 2 emergency sessions since the House and Senate broke. And in neither of those did they deal with getting health care to people through accepting Medicaid expansion, which, by the way, is a very smart fiscal decision. We're giving up $1.4 billion a year in the state of Tennessee by not accepting those monies. The money that the state would be responsible for, the Tennessee Hospital Association's already said they'd pick up that bill. So we know that we're closing rural hospitals. We have the largest rural hospital per capita of any nation in the country. We have the largest bankruptcies per capita of any state in the nation. So we have more than 50% of our children in the state of Tennessee are actually on TennCare. These are statistics that are given to us, not, I didn't create them. They're not like some crazy politician's pipe dream to be able to win a race. These are things given to us like through the Sycamore Institute, through the CDC. These are substantial and researched and presented information. They're not from a news outlet. So they're not a reporter. I mean, reporters are supposed to get documented sources, right? And you're supposed to have at least 2 of those, the big newspapers that do that, a lot of channels don't. But yes, so we're seeing that there's a huge impact of COVID-19 on a lot of Knoxvillians just because of their economic status. And so I know you're asking me about my position as a physician or campaigning, but this is so important to me that people realize how compromised we've been as a consequence of neglect from our legislators. And I can say that the one that I'm running against absolutely has not been helpful in participating in trying to move the needle in a way that would make more people get health coverage. She certainly voted for it, but she was never a vocal advocate. In the last meeting she had, she sat in the health committee, was given an opportunity to get to advance it onto the floor. Medicaid expansion, she chose not to. So we have a real crisis here in healthcare that could have looked very different. We have very terrible contract tracing, if any at all. And and our testing situation is abominable. So, but now as statistics are being moved to the White House instead of the CDC, White House gets to determine what they send to the CDC. CDC is now making new recommendations based on the data that they have from the White House. I mean, it's just become this horrible loop. And then we have a legislature who sort of falls in step with with what's happening in Washington through the administration, and they had those policies down in our own state, not serving our people. That's for sure.
Yeah,
making it worse. I mean, absolutely making things on the economy even worse, not better, but worse.
Yeah, Justin, that was, I think, one of the issues you ran on pretty heavily in 2018 and again in 2020 was the expansion of Medicaid. And, what are your thoughts about that situation now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did. That was a major issue for me. And it's, even crazier that we're not working to expand Medicaid in the face of a pandemic. We've seen access to care lost because so many of our hospitals have closed. And I've said, with those rural hospitals, if you've got a hospital 10 miles away as opposed to 45 minutes away, I mean, that is big in terms of surviving a heart attack or a stroke or any other emergency. So if we expanded Medicaid, we could begin to reopen these hospitals, get people the care, access to the care that they need. We've been facing an opioid crisis here in the state for some time now. We could push some funding toward, rehabilitating these people, getting them access to the care that they need. We're facing issues and underfunding of mental health, which is extremely important. So we're seeing so many people go without access to care simply, citing affordability. And as we face a pandemic, it is extremely important. As Jane said, we're sending billions of dollars out of state that's going to work for other states. We need to bring that money back to work for Tennesseans. It's extremely important. it was important in 2018, and it's much more important in 2020 as we face this pandemic.
Yeah, I've noticed a change in heart from some folks about the notion of Medicaid expansion and, you know, health insurance and health coverage in general. I mean, now that someone can breathe on you and 2 weeks later you'll be on a ventilator has given us all pause about how we want to care for our community. And this is kind of a theme I've been coming back to, this, you know, this rugged individualism that we have as a country, I don't think is serving us well right now. Because if your thinking is, if it doesn't fit me and my family, nobody gets to have it, is just, you know, or I'm not going to support it because supporting it makes me weak. You know, we're in big trouble. And you can see it right now with us not dealing with the COVID crisis and not dealing with all the things it's created. Health is connected to the economy and to education and to the environment. It's all in this big containers. You know, everything is hitched together to everything else. And when it comes to these issues, you know, and we try to like silo them, but I think it's getting to the point where, you know, we have this great challenge, but with this great challenge comes a great opportunity. And I'm hoping that people will see that and that they will, you know, start voting for people that also have the same vision for a greater community. That's my hope. Well, we're getting to the end of our time together. And I want to say it's been great talking to you guys. Thanks for coming on the show. You're both great candidates, and I know you're going to serve your constituents well. To the folks listening, you know, I say this all the time, candidates need two things. They need votes and they need money. And I'm going to assume the listening audience is a voting audience. I now want you to be a financial supporter to these campaigns. So we're going to put the link to Justin and Jane's websites so you can go there and support them. No donation is too small. We need your support, and that is one way that you can help candidates, because we do have to pay for things on campaigns. So please do support our candidates. Jane and Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to come.
Oh,
I know you guys are busy,
Thank
even
you.
though we're just Zooming together. And I also want to thank our technical expert, Madison Hicks, who's behind the scenes making sure the show gets off without a hitch. Thank you, Madison. And to everybody else out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, be safe, and I will see you next